Story number 1. I never thought my part-time job at McDonald's would turn my life into a horror story. My name is Emma, and I'm a college student. This all started with a man who came into McDonald's every day. At first, he was just another face in the crowd, but soon I couldn't help noticing him. He always ordered a Big Mac, no onions, and a large Coke. Then, he'd sit in the far corner, always the same spot, and watch me. At first, I shrugged it off, but days turned into weeks, and his stare grew heavier, more intense. It was like he was burning holes into my soul. I started feeling a chill run down my spine whenever our eyes met. I told myself I was imagining things, but deep down, I knew something was off. Then, the notes started. They were left at my workstation, slipped into my locker, even tucked under my apartment door. Each note was creepier than the last, talking about my hair, my smile, what I wore yesterday. He knew things about me that no one should know. How did he know I visit my grandma every Sunday, or that I broke my arm when I was 12? I felt like I was being watched everywhere. The familiar streets I walked every day suddenly seemed threatening. I saw shadows move in the corners of my eyes. Was it him? Was he following me? One evening, the fear became real. I found a photo of me under the wiper of my car. It was a picture taken from afar, showing me walking down my street. On the back, a message: "Can't wait for our special meeting." My hands shook as I read it. I couldn't pretend anymore. This wasn't just some weird guy. This was serious. The next day at work, I was a bundle of nerves. Every customer that walked in made me jump. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see him lurking there. But he didn't show up. Not that day, not the next. His absence was somehow worse, the anticipation eating at me. I decided I had to do something. I couldn't live like this, constantly looking over my shoulder. So, I planned to confront him. If he came back, I'd be ready. I practiced what I'd say, how I'd demand answers. Then, he appeared again, as if he'd never left. Same order, same spot, same unnerving stare. My heart pounded as I approached him, wiping sweaty palms on my uniform. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, trying to sound braver than I felt. His response chilled me to the bone. "I just wanted to be close to you," he said, his voice eerily calm. "You're so beautiful, Emma. I feel like I've known you forever." I was frozen in place, fear gripping me. How did he know my name? I hadn't worn my name tag in weeks. As he stood up, I stepped back. He reached into his pocket, and I braced myself. But instead of a weapon, he pulled out another note. "Read this," he said, his ease never leaving mine. The note was different. It wasn't about me. It was about him. He wrote of loneliness, of feeling invisible in a crowded world, of seeing me and feeling a connection he couldn't explain. He wrote of his desire to be seen, to be acknowledged. I didn't know how to feel. Fear was still there, but so was sadness. Sadness for this man who was so lost in his own loneliness that he didn't realize the terror he was causing. I looked at him, really looked at him. His eyes weren't threatening, they were pleading. "You can't do this," I said softly. "You can't invade someone's life like this. It's wrong. It's scary." He nodded, looking down. "I know," he whispered. "I just didn't know how else to reach out." We talked for what seemed like hours. I told him about boundaries, about how his actions affected me. He listened, really listened. And as we talked, I saw him change. The obsessive glint in his eyes dimmed. Story number 2. I remember it was a chilly evening in November. The city was alive with lights and sounds, but inside the McDonald's on 5th Street, it was just another busy night. I, Lisa, was there to grab a quick bite before heading to the library for a night of studying. The place was packed with all sorts of people, and I found a spot near the window. That's when I first saw him. This guy, probably in his late 30s, dressed in a coat that was a bit too heavy for the weather. He stood out to me because he kept looking over at this girl sitting by herself. She looked about my age, maybe younger, with headphones on and her eyes fixed on her phone. I remember thinking she must be waiting for someone. Let's call her Alice. As I ate my fries, I couldn't help but notice the guy inching closer to Alice. Every time she glanced up, he'd look away, but as soon as she was distracted, his eyes were back on her. It was weird, you know? Like, really weird. Alice seemed to feel it too. She shifted in her seat, pulled her jacket tighter around her. But the guy, he just got braver. He moved to a table closer to her, trying to start a chat. Alice wasn't having it, though. She kept her answers short, clearly uncomfortable. I texted my friend about it, saying something like, "Creepy guy at McD's, bad vibes." My friend was like, "Stay out of it." But I couldn't just sit there. When Alice got up to throw her trash away, the guy followed her. That was it for me. I left my stuff and walked right up to her, acting all friendly and loud. "Alice, OMG, it's been forever." Her eyes were wide with confusion, but she played along. I linked my arm with hers and steered her away from the guy. He looked surprised, annoyed even, but he backed off, leaving his unfinished meal and heading out into the night. Alice and I sat back down, and I explained why I'd done that. She was shaking a bit, thanking me over and over. We hung out for a while after that, talking about random stuff, trying to shake off the creepy encounter. Turns out Alice was new in town, didn't know many people. We exchanged numbers, promising to hang out again. Later, when I walked home, I kept looking over my shoulder. The streets felt different, like shadows were watching. I told myself I was being paranoid, but the feeling lingered. The next day, Alice texted me. She'd seen the guy again near her apartment. This time she was really scared. We met up, and I told her we should report it, but she didn't want to involve the cops. She said she'd probably just overreacted. I didn't think so. That night at McDonald's wasn't normal. I felt it in my gut. Something was off about that guy. Something more than just being a creep. We started hanging out more, partly because we got along, partly because Alice didn't feel safe alone. I didn't mind. It felt good to be there for someone. But things got weirder. I'd see that coat, the same heavy one the guy wore, out of the corner of my eye, disappearing around corners or down subway entrances. Every time I'd look properly, there'd be nothing there. I told Alice, and she got more frightened. She said she'd seen him too. Always just a glimpse. Always when she was alone. It was like he was taunting us, playing some sick game. Then one night, it all came to a head. Alice called me, panic in her voice. He was there, outside her building. I raced over, heart pounding, anger and fear mixing in my chest. But when I got there, the street was empty. No sign of the guy, just the cold night air and the distant sound of traffic. Alice was at her window, phone in hand, tears streaming down her face. The days that followed were tense. We stuck together, always looking over our shoulders. The city felt different, hostile, like it was hiding something sinister in plain sight. In the end, we never saw the guy again. But the fear he brought into our lives stayed with us. We'd been marked by something unexplainable, a darkness that lurked in the everyday. That McDonald's, the city, it all feels different to me now. I'm more cautious, more aware. You never know what's hiding in the crowd, what eyes might be watching you, waiting for a moment to strike. Story number 3. It was just a summer job. That's what I kept telling myself when I started working at the McDonald's on Shadow Lane. But there was something about this place that felt off from the start. I guess it was the reason I took the job in the first place, drawn in by the whispers of something strange happening here. The days were mostly normal, filled with flipping burgers and taking orders. But then, there was order number 86. It was an odd combo, a Big Mac with no sauce, a small Coke, and 2 apple pies. No one ever ordered it at the counter. It just showed up on the screen, and when it did, weird stuff happened. The screens would flicker, and a cold draft would sweep through the place, making everyone shiver. The staff joked about it, saying order number 86 was our ghost, our own little mystery. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it. I started watching the regulars, the ones who seemed as much a part of this place as the old, greasy fryers. There was the old man who always sat in the corner, staring out the window with sad eyes. A woman who muttered to herself over a cup of coffee, her words a quiet, constant stream. And then there were the teenagers, a group of them, always laughing too loud, their conversation an echo of something familiar, yet distant. I asked the older staff about them, but they just shrugged, saying they were just part of the place, like the old booths and faded menu signs. But I needed to know more, so I started digging around, asking questions in town. That's when I heard about the accident. It was years ago, a group of teenagers from the local high school. They'd been regulars here, always hanging out late into the night. One night they left and got into a car crash just a few blocks away. No survivors. It sent a chill down my spine, especially when I learned what they'd ordered that night, the exact items of Order 86. I couldn't let it go. The coincidence was too much. I started staying late, watching the screens, waiting for the order to pop up. And it did, night after night. Each time the air would grow cold, and I'd feel like someone was watching me, their gaze heavy on my back. One night, when the order appeared again, I decided to make it, to see what would happen. I prepared the Big Mac, the Coke, and the apple pies, my hands shaking slightly. I set it on the tray and just stood there, staring at it, the sense of being watched growing stronger. The old man in the corner stood up, his eyes meeting mine. He walked over to the counter, slow, deliberate steps. My heart was pounding so loud I could barely hear him when he spoke. They never got to eat it, you know. Their last meal, left untouched as their lives slipped away, he said, his voice a whisper of memories and sadness. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. I just stared at him, at the food on the counter. They come back, you know, trying to relive that last night, trying to change it, but they can't. It's always the same. The laughter, the jokes, and then the order. Order 86. The woman came over too, her muttering now making sense, a litany of regrets and what-ifs. The teenagers stopped laughing. They turned to look at me, their eyes filled with a longing so deep it hurt to see. They walked over, standing by the counter, looking at the food, then at me. "You can see us, can't you?" one of them asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, unable to find my voice. "We just want to leave, to move on. But we're stuck in that last night, in the mistake that cost us everything," another one said, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. I looked at them, at all the ghosts of this place, bound by their last moments in this world, and I knew what I had to do. I picked up the tray and walked outside, the ghosts following me. I walked to the spot where the accident had happened, the place where their laughter had turned to screams, their future to memories. I set the tray down on the sidewalk, the food a silent offering to the past. "It's time to let go," I whispered, my voice steady despite the tears streaming down my face. "It's time to move on."